See? She is broken beyond repair. We need to lock her away before she kills us all. Those were the first words I heard. My father, Stephen, was standing over my bed, filming me with his phone. I looked down at my hands. Someone had duct-taped a kitchen knife to my palm while I slept, and smeared red paint all over my chest. He smiled at the camera, acting terrified. But I was not looking at him. I was looking at the mirror across the room, where the words "Get out" were written in red. My ears picked up a faint, high-pitched whine coming from the glass. It was a capacitor hum. Ghosts do not have voltage. And in that moment, I knew. They were not haunting me. They were setting me up. 2 weeks before the knife incident, my husband Ben kissed me goodbye at the door. He had a smart home conference in Tokyo and would be gone for a month. He hesitated, looking at my parents who were unloading their suitcases from a rental car. He asked if I was sure about this. I told him yes. I told him I needed my family. My grandmother had just passed, leaving me Blackwood Manor, and I felt small in the empty hallways. I thought they were there to help me grieve. I was wrong. They were there to help me lose my mind. The ritual started on the very first night. My mother, Mariah, would knock on my door at 9 o'clock sharp. She always carried a porcelain tray with a steaming cup of what she called her family herbal blend. It smelled like chamomile and heavy, cloying honey. I drank it because I wanted to please her. I wanted to be the good daughter who accepted her mother's care. But the sweetness was a lie. It was there to mask the bitter, chalky taste of crushed benzodiazepines. Here is the thing about medical gaslighting that makes it so effective. It is not just about lying to someone. It is about biological warfare. When you mess with someone's brain chemistry, you take away their ability to trust their own senses. My mother would sit on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair, humming a lullaby, while literally handing me a chemical lobotomy. She watched me drink the poison with a smile on her face. That level of intimacy mixed with that level of malice is something I still struggle to comprehend. She was not just greedy. She was willing to erase me, to turn my brain into mush, just to get a signature on a power of attorney form. 30 minutes after the tea, the world would start to tilt. The edges of my vision would vibrate. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and detach from the walls. That was when my father, Stephen, would start his work. He knew the drugs made me suggestible, made my brain fill in the gaps. He used a cheap office projector hidden behind a fern to cast a blurry, gray figure against the sheer curtains. To a sober person, it would have looked ridiculous. But to me, swimming in a sedative fog, it looked exactly like my dead grandmother. I would scream. I would cry out that she was there, pointing at me. And then my sister, Madison, would whisper through the air vents. She is a failed actress, but she does a terrifying impression of an old woman. She would hiss that I was ungrateful, that I stole the house, that I was cursed. I spent nights huddled under my duvet, shaking, convinced I was inheriting the schizophrenia that had plagued my grandmother's later years. Every morning, I would wake up groggy, missing hours of time. My parents would look at me with pity. They would tell me I had been screaming at the walls. They showed me videos of myself stumbling around, eyes wide and empty, looking completely insane. They told me they were doing this for my own good. They said I needed professional help. They said I should sign over control of the estate so they could pay for the best doctors. I almost believed them. I was ready to sign. But then, 3 days before the knife incident, I knocked over the kitchen trash can. Among the coffee grounds and eggshells, I saw a crumpled envelope. It was a foreclosure notice for my parents' house in the city. They owed $300,000 to a private lending firm, and the deadline was next week. I stood there, staring at the red ink, and the fog in my brain cleared just enough for a single thought to form. They were not worried about my sanity. They were worried about their debt, and I was the only asset they had left to liquidate. Ben came home 2 days later. He was supposed to be in Tokyo for another week, but I think he sensed something in my text messages. Or maybe it was the silence. When he walked through the front door, my mother tried to intercept him. I heard her voice from the top of the stairs, pitched in that fake, concerned whisper she had perfected. She told him I was having a severe episode. She told him I was dangerous. She tried to stop him from coming up to our room. But Ben is 6'2", and he does not have time for nonsense. He pushed past her and threw open the bedroom door. I was sitting on the floor in the corner, holding a screwdriver I had hidden under the mattress. When I saw him, the relief was so physical it made me dizzy. I dropped the tool and collapsed into his arms. He smelled like airport coffee and safety. He held me while I shook, while I tried to find the words through the chemical haze still lingering in my brain. "They want to commit me," I whispered against his chest. "They need the money, Ben. Dad lost the house." He pulled back and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed from the long flight, but they were sharp. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not ask if I was imagining it. He just looked at the bruises on my arms from where I had stumbled during my induced hallucinations, and his jaw set hard. "Show me," he said. I pointed to the air vent near the ceiling. That was where the whispering came from. My sister, Madison, would wait until 3 in the morning to hiss terrible things into the ductwork from the guest room down the hall. To anyone else, it sounded like the wind. But I know acoustics. I know how sound travels through galvanized steel. I told him about the hum in the mirror. I told him about the shadows that only appeared when the projector was running. I told him about the foreclosure notice in the trash. I watched his face shift from worry to a cold, focused anger. Ben designs smart home systems for a living. He understands how houses work. He knows that if a mirror is vibrating at 15 kilohertz, it is not because it is possessed. It is because there is a cheap Bluetooth speaker glued behind the glass. He stood up and walked over to the vent. He pulled out his phone and opened a network analyzer app. He stood there for a long minute, watching the signal strength bars fluctuate. Then he turned the screen to me. There were 5 unauthorized devices connected to our local network. Smart bulbs, audio receivers, and a high-lumen projector. All of them had been installed in the last 2 weeks. "They are not even using a secure network," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They are running a haunted house on a consumer-grade mesh network." That was the moment everything changed. I stopped being the scared little girl hiding from monsters. I remembered who I was. I am not a victim. I am an engineer, and my husband is a tech expert. We sat on the bed, and for the first time in weeks, I did not feel like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was solving a problem. They wanted to use technology to gaslight me. Fine. We were about to show them what happens when you try to outsmart the people who wrote the manual. We did not confront them. We did not call the police. Not yet. We needed undeniable proof. We needed to catch them in the act. Ben took my hand and squeezed it. "Keep drinking the tea," he said. "But do not swallow it. Pour it in the plant. Tonight, we let them think they have won." I looked at the door, where I knew my mother was listening on the other side. I let out a jagged breath and nodded. I was ready to play my part. I was ready to turn the tables. The first thing I did was neutralize the poison. Ben was right. I could not just stop drinking the tea. That would make them suspicious. So, I became an expert at sleight of hand. Every night when my mother brought the cup, I would take it with shaking hands, thanking her through fake tears. As soon as she turned to leave, I would dump it into the large potted ficus plant in the corner of my room. By day 3, the ficus was dying. Its leaves were turning yellow and dropping to the floor. It was a terrifying, visual confirmation of exactly what they were trying to do to my brain. But my mind was clearing. The fog lifted. The fear remained, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I needed evidence. Not just of the devices, but of the intent. I needed a recording. I pulled out my professional gear, a directional microphone I usually used for field recording, and a high-end spectrogram software suite on my laptop. I waited until midnight, until the haunting began. The wailing started at 2 in the morning, drifting through the vents. To anyone else, it sounded like a ghostly moan. But through my headphones, watching the waveform dance on my screen, I saw the truth. It was a digital loop, and it was flawed. I zoomed in on the frequency spectrum. There, buried under the reverb and the artificial distortion, was a low-frequency noise. A human noise. I applied a high-pass filter to strip away the ghost effects. My heart hammered as the sound cleaned up. It was breathing. Rhythmic, excited breathing. And then, a whisper. Faint, but unmistakable. "Is the volume loud enough, Dad?" It was Madison. My sister. She was not a ghost. She was giggling. I saved the file. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. Then I texted Ben. I got them. Ben had been busy too. He could not find the pills in the bathroom or the kitchen. My mother was too smart to leave a prescription bottle lying around. But she was not smart enough to clean up her prep station. Ben found it in the pantry, tucked behind the flour and sugar, a heavy stone mortar and pestle. He pulled it out carefully. Inside the stone bowl, ground into the rough surface, was a fine white powder residue. He scraped a sample into a Ziploc bag. It was not the pills themselves, but it was the tool used to grind them. It was forensic proof of premeditation. We had the audio. We had the chemical residue. We had the network logs of their devices. We had everything we needed to go to the police. But we didn't just want them arrested. We wanted them destroyed. We wanted to expose them in front of the very people they were trying to impress. The opportunity came 2 days later. My father announced that he had scheduled a competency hearing at the house. He had hired a private psychiatrist, a man named Dr. Vance, who had a reputation for signing whatever was put in front of him for the right price. They were going to do it at midnight, during one of my episodes. to ensure the doctor saw me at my worst. It was the perfect stage. And I was ready to bring the curtain down. The hearing was set for midnight. Stephen had been manic all day, pacing the hallways, checking his phone, muttering about legal precedents. He had convinced himself that this was the final hurdle. Once Dr. Vance signed the papers, I would be committed, the power of attorney would activate, and the house would be his to sell. He was already browsing real estate listings for condos in the city. I spent the day in my room, resting. In reality, I was preparing. I checked the Bluetooth transmitter I kept in my gig bag. It was a rugged, professional-grade device designed to override interference in crowded concert venues. It had enough gain to blast a signal through concrete walls. Stephen's cheap consumer speakers didn't stand a chance. At 11:30 that night, a sedan pulled up. Through the curtain, I saw Dr. Vance step out tired, irritated, briefcase in hand. My mother met him at the door, whispering just loud enough for me to hear that I got violent if moved during the day. So midnight was safer. I put on the paint-stained nightgown Madison had ruined and messed up my hair. I needed to look fragile. I needed them confident. At midnight, I walked into a living room lit by candles, pure theater. Stephen stood by the fireplace with a projector remote hidden in his pocket. Madison curled on the sofa, pretending to be terrified. "Celine," Dr. Vance said. "Your parents say you've been seeing things." I let my hands tremble. "She's here," I whispered. "Can't you see her?" Stephen hit the button. The projector threw a warped shadow on the wall, and hidden speakers started a slow, heavy thumping. Madison shrieked. Stephen barked at me to stop. The doctor flinched, scanning the room. "It's her," my mother cried. "She's telekinetic." The lie was pathetic, but in the darkness, with the noise rising, it worked. Fear flickered in the doctor's eyes. He opened his briefcase, pulled out commitment papers, and snapped his pen open. "I've seen enough. This environment is unsafe. Sign here, Mr. Blackwood." Stephen reached for the pen with a victorious smile. That's when I stopped shaking. I stood tall, met my father's eyes, and pulled a transmitter from my pocket. "You know, Dad," I said calmly. "For a gambler, you have a terrible poker face." Stephen froze. "What?" I flipped the switch and cranked the gain. The speakers screamed with brutal feedback. The thumping died. The projector flickered out as I jammed the signal. Then silence. And then the room filled with a recording, my mother's voice, crystal clear. "Grind 2 more pills. A beat later. If she doesn't sign tonight, we overdose her and make it look like a suicide." Dr. Vance went pale and dropped his pen. "What is that?" he whispered. "That," I said, aiming the transmitter at my mother, "is the sound of a felony." Stephen hammered the remote, but I'd locked the system. The loop kept playing overdose her. Overdose her. Louder. Uglier. Undeniable. My mother screamed for it to stop. Stephen yelled that I'd hacked it. Dr. Vance bolted for the French doors locked. He rattled the handle, panicking. "Let me out." "Sorry, doctor," I said. "My husband locked those 5 minutes ago. You're staying for the finale." The front door blew inward. "Police, get on the ground. Now." 4 tactical officers flooded the room. Ben followed, furious but steady, pointing to the table. "That's the poison," he said. "Residues in the pantry." Stephen dropped to his knees. My mother sobbed and tried to paint me as the crazy one, while her own recorded voice kept convicting her in a loop. The aftermath blurred into blue lights and shouting, but I stood still, watching handcuffs click. It didn't feel like tragedy. It felt like a correction. Officers bagged the teacup and sealed the white powder residue as evidence. They found Dr. Vance hiding under the dining table and arrested him for conspiracy and malpractice. He folded immediately, insisting he was only hired to sign papers. When they dragged Madison out, she wasn't acting anymore, she was crying for real. Staring at me like she was looking for the sister she once had. She found a stranger. I leaned close so only she could hear me over the sirens. "Next time you try to haunt a sound engineer," I whispered, "don't breathe into the microphone." She flinched, and they took her away. The legal process was brutal but fast. The recording held up, and toxicology confirmed lethal intent. Stephen and Mariah are now facing 20 years in federal prison for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. They lost the gamble. We sold Blackwood Manor 3 months later to a developer. I took nothing from that house but my equipment. Yesterday, Ben and I drove past the empty property one last time. I opened my Spectrum Analyzer app and held it up to the silent driveway. A flat green line. No spikes, no hidden frequencies, no ghosts. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Have you ever suspected someone you loved was lying only to learn the truth was worse? Tell me your story in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one.